What's up, my psychonauts? This episode is about psychedelics and how they affect the brain. I'm talking in this conversation with Dr. Manesh Girn, a friend of mine who is also a popular science content creator and a researcher. He currently works at the University of California in San Francisco, along with Dr. Robin Carhart-Harris, and he's conducting research on how the neural mechanisms underlying the psychedelic experience actually shift and change, and how psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy affects the brain and how it affects people's lives. In addition to that, he also has a digital platform on Instagram and YouTube called the Psychedelic-Scientist, where he distills this information and shares it in an easy to understand way for those of us who aren't neuroscientists. This conversation is fantastic, in my opinion. I enjoyed it. We talk a lot about how psychedelic experiences affect the brain, how they affect the default mode network, and how they kind of give us this therapeutic opportunity that we wouldn't necessarily have. We talk about the difference between talk therapy and psychedelic therapy, and the opportunity that psychedelics offer for a type of embodied healing that isn't often possible otherwise, along with an opportunity to do somatic work. We talk a little bit about somatic work and how to work on the nervous system during a psychedelic experience. We also talk about Manesh's journey of personal growth. He's not just a scientist who decided to study this stuff. He has been on his own personal growth journey. That's how we know each other. We know each other from the Arca Brotherhood in Vancouver, and we were in a container, let's call it a personal growth container workshop for a season called a Conscious Relationship Training. And we talk about the value actually of in-person containers where people are looking at each other and giving each other feedback and interacting with each other in a very real way. And you will probably feel encouraged after this conversation to join something in person. There's a lot of personal growth stuff online. I do a lot of personal growth stuff online, and I'm always an advocate for finding something in your local area in person that you can get into, because there's nothing like that real life in-person energy exchange that occurs when you're not behind a computer screen. In this episode, we also talk about bad trips, the darkness that comes up on psychedelic trips, and actually how to ensure that you are never scarred negatively by any psychedelic experience. We also talk about neuroplasticity. We also talk about the importance of attention and really showing up for an experience. Intention is probably a better word. How your intention and like your level of bringing yourself to something, how important that is, not just in psychedelics, but in any personal growth workshop. And we actually talk about how psychedelic experiences are akin to a workshop that's occurring in your own mind, and how important it is to show up in a certain way for that. So really stoked to share this conversation with you about psychedelics and how it affects the brain. A couple things that you should know about happening in the Evolving Man space that are kind of related to this this episode. One, I'm probably going to start taking groups of people who just want to work with me down to the jungle for ayahuasca journeys, maybe a 12 to 14 day journey to a place that I trust, to a place that I've been to, that I work with the people there. And it's probably going to happen in 2025. And I'm building a list, an email list that's just for people who are interested in those types of retreats and the retreats that I sometimes run at my home for men. And if you want to get on that list, send me an email or send me a DM on Instagram and ask to be added to that list, and I'll add you to it. And the other thing that's probably worth mentioning here is the Arca Brotherhood. Manesh and I met in the Arca Brotherhood. It has done so much for both of us to transform our lives. When I joined Arca, I had done a whole bunch of other personal growth stuff in my life. I had got a counseling degree and gone to a whole bunch of workshops, but there was something really special about sitting in a circle with men every week with the intention to grow and with the intention to see each other and really know each other and to have each other's backs. Accountability, goal setting, openness to share your truth, no matter what it may be. Shadow work was welcome. There's something that I can't even really speak to that is so special about that container. And when I joined, there was 3 groups in ARCA. And when Manesh was in, he was in like the second or third group around the same time as me. And there's 60 now. ARCA is growing and we're training new leaders. I'm involved with that. I'm training the leaders and overseeing the organization. And I'm just totally behind the mission that ARCA has to wake men up, to connect them to each other, to raise their consciousness, and to just build better men and make them give them an opportunity to be truly happy and fulfilled in their lives. So there's in-person ARCA groups in various cities, and there's online groups. And you can check out what's available to you on arcabrotherhood.com, ARKA brotherhood.com. Check it out. Okay, folks, Manesh Girn, enjoy this. Dr. Manesh Girn. I'm here with an old friend, Manesh Girn, PhD, recent PhD. Thank you for coming on the show, brother. It's good to see you.
Yeah, my pleasure. This chat is a long time coming.
Yeah, totally. It totally is, man. We've known each other for a few years, and you are a psychedelic researcher. You also have a face on YouTube, and you share that information with people in a good way. And so I wanted to have a conversation with you about what's happening in psychedelics, neuroscience, what you find to be interesting right now, where you think things are going. I know you're working with one of the top names in the field, Robin Carhart-Harris. And so, yeah, I'm excited to hear about, just all of the things, man. Neuroplasticity, how psychedelics facilitate healing, how ego death actually can help us heal. But maybe we should start with how we got to know each other through Samurai Brotherhood, which is now ARCA Brotherhood, and what your journey has been that's led you to this place where you want to dedicate your life to this kind of a research. So let's start there. Where did we first meet?
Yeah, we either met at some kind of like larger event within the Brotherhood, or at the workshop series, the conscious relationship trainings that go on in Vancouver.
That's right.
So in one of these two settings, and it was interesting. I got drawn to the Brotherhood through our mutual friend, Chris Soul, because we worked together at Float House, a sensory deprivation tank center. And, my interest in joining Float House and working there part-time during my undergrad was through an interest in altered states and consciousness and self-development and all these things. And so really the psychedelic path and then the men's group path and all the many other transformational retreats, communities, things I've been involved in are all coming from this very similar place. I feel like they're all very interconnected in terms of, gaining deeper insight into yourself, growing, seeking out challenge, and always seeking to expand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you joined Samurai Brotherhood, Wolf Squad, if I recall correctly.
Legendary squad.
I have a strong memory of you guys doing this like tug of war exercise at this physical event that we had called the Wolverine, and you guys were just absolute beasts in the tug of war. Tug of war is, I don't think it's something that happens very often anymore,
right.
But it's just this raw power experience that's like really cool to be a part of. But you guys are a fantastic team, and I think that's where I first have a strong memory of seeing you. And then we did conscious relationship training together, and what were the significant steps that you made forward in those years that because I remember you as being like a physically strong guy, seeing you in the tug of war, but also seeing you as this very reserved guy at the time, where almost robotic, or like there was a wall between me and you. Like I couldn't feel you. And I don't sense that anymore. So like clearly you've done some significant work, and I'm curious what that journey was like for you, and how you would explain it.
Totally, man. So yeah, when I got into the brotherhood, that and the conscious relationship training, that's what everyone said to me. It's like I can hear you, but I don't feel you. You know, you're just all head, all mind, all cognitive, no heart, no feeling, right? And I think in overcoming that, essential part of that was like people telling me that, right? And like going to men's group and getting called out on it, and realizing how it's there and how it's was impairing my relationships with women or with everybody really. And I think part of that was acknowledging emotional wounding and armoring from my childhood. You know, parents fighting growing up, and then also bullying experiences in high school. And I realized my pattern was to basically go into the place of, oh, I'm above all this. I don't care about all this. I'm indifferent to it. This stuff doesn't bother me. Essentially dissociating, right?
Yeah.
And why that stuck with me for so long is because also I'm big on meditation and Eastern spirituality. So it was a form of spiritual bypassing. It's like, why would I experience anger and sadness and care about all these worldly things? I'm an advanced spiritual being, right?
Yeah, I've jumped up to this level up here.
Yeah, I don't deal with this human stuff, you know. But it wasn't that. It wasn't it wasn't coming from an integrated place, right? And I think things that moved the needle for me were just embodiment based practices and exercises, and just stepping into emotional vulnerability, acknowledging that there was pain there, acknowledging that there were things I needed to work through, and not sharing it just verbally, like allowing myself to show that, oh, this stuff does matter. This stuff did hurt me, and it does have an emotional charge, right? And this happened in Wolf Squad, in conscious relationship training, in ayahuasca retreats I went to. And then later, I found about 2 years ago, this amazing therapist. She's based in Montreal when I was living in Montreal. And her whole thing is, it's like, she knows all sorts of different modalities, alternative modalities, but it's like emotion-centered, body-focused therapy, right? So she would literally, it's amazing. She's this small French woman, and she would have me come into her basement. And in her basement was a giant pillow structure. And then next to it, all sorts of weapons to beat the shit out of this structure with. So I'd come there, and she'd be like, okay, grab the baseball bat, you know? And she's like, I know you don't feel anything, just start hitting. Then I start hitting, and then she knows my background or whatever. And she's like, oh, like, you know, try to recall times when you suppressed yourself when people were bullying you. And like, you know, tell them to fuck off. Tell them you're going to fucking kill them, or like, you know, just a way of me channeling that energy, because I would share very intense stuff, but just monotone. Right. And she would try to get me engaged. And that process of yelling and beating the shit out of things and pulling that primal energy and pain out of me, that really changed things and really opened me up in a beautiful way.
Yeah, I think this is a very important point that you're sharing about your story. And I think it's a common point between a lot of people. I had a call with my Evolving Man community. I have this little like circle online of men who are just a part of this little membership platform. And I host these live calls, open men's groups for any guys who are on the platform to come and show up. And the other day, every man had a similar check-in where he was saying, hey, I've read like a ton of books about relationships. Like I've read I'm Getting the Love You Want. I worked with John Weiland. I read David Deda's book. Like I've gone to workshops and stuff, but like my relationship isn't really changing.
Totally.
And so we started digging into that with each guy. And the crucial question was, what are you doing? You know, what are you actually taking action on? And none of the guys were really doing anything with their partners different from what before they had done all the learning. And that speaks to this thing that so many guys do, where we really dissociate from feeling, and then we like to live in the world of learning. And some people will even get into the field of academics so that they can just live in that cerebral space
Mm-hmm.
for their
It's
whole
safe.
lives.
Mm-hmm.
It's safe. It's a safe
Mm-hmm.
place. You don't have to connect to the heart. You don't have to connect to the feelings. You get to bypass them all.
Totally.
And the world rewards that. There's not a lot of structures in the world that are saying to men like, hey, you got to feel those feelings. Make sure you're feeling those feelings. Right. But the structures that are there are people's desire to actually connect with us, and you know, the feelings of being disconnected from us when we're just all up here. Right. But we really can get away with that.
Definitely.
Yeah. And so these practices, these embodiment practices, where the only purpose is for you to practice feeling. I remember we did breath work as well a few times, you and I.
Right.
And also a fantastic practice for just, it's interesting how agitating the chest and the belly, in and out, breathing more than you normally would. You kind of go into this dream state, but you're also like activating the core part of your body where there's a lot of emotions that live there, right? You're sort of shaking it up, and lo and behold, they kind of flow out of you. The transformation that can happen for a person, the amount of like healing that a person can have in one of those sessions. Like people tell me regularly, like, wow, that felt like years of therapy, you know, in one go, because therapy can be very cerebral. It can be very much about like, yeah, what's happening, and what pattern is this? And, you know, digging into the story a lot. But the embodied healing can really be missing. So these practices of just, it might not make sense. It might not make sense to the mind, but going in with the body, really just practicing on opening the heart and just expressing feeling. That's a muscle that atrophies in most men and needs practice. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, people have such elaborate defense mechanisms, right? And a lot of our thinking is just a defense mechanism to avoid feeling, right? And as you said, in men, it's not only is it like culturally sanctioned to be stoic and grounded and all of this in that kind of traditional hyper-masculine ideal, but then also it's rewarded, you know, like I'm a scientist, right? Like I work with people who are just walking brains, you know, you just live up there. They have trouble with social interaction, you know, and they generally don't seem connected to their emotions and body and their full expansive vibrance as an individual, even though they're hyper successful and intelligent, and probably in spite of that, right? Or because of that. And, so like we need ways for people to, one, see the value of reconnecting and see the possibility of that and what that can look like, and then ways to do it. Right. And breath work is so powerful. Men's group containers, things like conscious relationship training, where you're kind of really, made to expose yourself in front of others and be highly vulnerable, and you can't hide behind a mask in that training. You'll get called out and get exposed sooner or later, right? That's what makes it so powerful and difficult and challenging. But this is where we can bridge psychedelics, because I think they really open people up too and diffuse your defense mechanisms and make you deal with shit that you've been suppressing for so long, and that you would take years of therapy to slowly pry those doors open. And then now you took 5 grams with the therapist or whatever, and you're just there, whether you like it or not.
So I'd like to do that bridge, and just so that people know that the common training that Manesh and I took, other than being a part of Samurai Brotherhood, which is now ARCA, is conscious relationship trainings. That's an in-person training that lasts 12 to 16 weeks, run by P.T. Misselberger, an author who wrote multiple books, including The Way of the Conscious Warrior. And the function of that training is, in the 80s, they called these confrontation groups, where people would sort of challenge each other's blocks and each other's ego and arrogance and like whatever was showing up in the moment, and speak to that and sort of expose it, right? So people were sharing with you that they couldn't feel you, and actually people shared that with me as well, that like I was sort of hiding, and they felt sort of intimidated by me, but they also didn't feel like they could fully trust me because I wasn't fully revealing myself to them. And this kind of feedback's very powerful. And then there's, of course, all kinds of activities that stretch you in this training. So I really encourage people to find something in their locale that does that kind of thing. There's authentic relating schools in different places that do similar processes and can help you break through. But yeah, somewhere along the way, you start doing psychedelics, and I'm guessing that you had some experiences for yourself that made you think like, oh, I want to become an academic in this field and like advance this research and help move it forward because this is so meaningful to me. I'm assuming that's what that was about. So I'd love to hear how you made that transition.
Yeah, definitely. So for me, you know, coming out of high school, I had a couple of years which were pretty rough for family reasons and then bullying type things. And what actually allowed me to rediscover and build up more self-esteem and just kind of belief in myself was I discovered a love for learning and like that I was good at it. Like I was able to understand things easily and you know, and think about and synthesize abstract information and all that. And so that made me really interested in this learning about things. And I had an interest in meditation and spirituality from before. And just reading about that got me into psychedelics as a potential way of inducing spiritual types of experiences and this kind of stuff. And then in around this happened like during all this, which is in like the summer after 10th grade, took some mushrooms over at Kitsilano Beach in Vancouver and on Canada Day. So it was like packed beach, fireworks, took some mushrooms. Yeah. Me and my friend, we both took it and it was only a couple of grams. It wasn't crazy, but you know, obviously I'd never tripped on a psychedelic before. And for anybody who has tried a psychedelic, that first experience is so mind blowing because you're not used to your entire experience of reality being changed to that degree. Mm-hmm. And I just remember sitting on the beach and, you know, there's fireworks were happening at the time and people are just like, you know, hammered on the beach, hollering at the fireworks. And I'm like, this is all just so absurd. We're a bunch of primates on this fucking beach, on this like rock flying through space, hollering at lights in the sky. It's like, what is going on?
Exploding bombs in the air, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I was just like, we have no clue what the fuck's going on. You know, we're just thrown into this life, living each day as if we know why we're here or how we got here. We're just rolling with what happens. Don't have a clue. And I realized just like how much I was able to shift at my usual way of perceiving myself in the world, and how that's possible would just eat some mushrooms, change your brain activity a bit. And it's like such a radical shift. It feels like reality has changed. Mm-hmm. And that just made me really interested. It's like, how is this happening? What are different ways to change our reality? Are some better than others? Are some more expansive and, you know, developed than others? How can I reach them? How can I understand them? And that is part of what led me, you know, to an interest in all these things, led me into the men's group and finding ways to grow and expand and change my consciousness. And through a variety of really great opportunities and like kind of synchronistic things, I got into a brain imaging lab at UBC during undergrad, doing research on mind wandering and meditation at the time. And that was like a stepping stone to getting involved in psychedelic research afterwards.
Wow, that's very cool. So you could observe people's brain activity while they were meditating.
Yeah, so I did a study like that in undergrad, actually. Yeah.
Wow, that's very
back
cool.
in the day.
Yeah. And so, yeah, what led you to your current position? And please share what your PhD thesis was, and then let's get into what you're studying now.
For sure. So yeah, so I was a student at UBC, and there was no psychedelic research going on at the UBC there at the time. That this would have been 2014 to 2017, that range. And so my lab, as I mentioned, was doing cool stuff around mind wandering and these kind of meditation and these kind of subjective things. So then I had the idea of coming up with a paper idea on how to bridge our research in our lab with research being done by the top researcher, which is Carhart-Harris, who I work with now. He was in London at the time. And so I found a way to write a kind of paper on psychedelics and creativity that draws on his research and on the research at UBC. wrote a proposal. We sent it to Robin. He liked it and ended up publishing a paper with him prior to starting grad school, and built that connection with him very early on. This was like 2017, 2018. And that was like, okay, I'm on his radar now, and I'm in with the top in the field, and,
nice.
and
That's
like
very
getting
smart.
in there.
You got yourself some clout, some academic clout early on there. It was pretty impressive.
Yeah, totally. Thank you. And yeah, like that, because I was like, I want to do this research, and how can I create this? And so I created that connection, and then I was planning to go work with him for my PhD, but he was in London at the time, right? And the opportunities for funding for a non-EU person to go to London were very minimal. Mm-hmm. So like, even though he like wanted to have me, he would have been down to have me. It just, the money wasn't there to go there, because it's, you know, it's very expensive to go as an international student as well. Yeah. So then I was like, okay, there's at the time still nothing related to psychedelics going on in Canada, but in Canada, I could get the most funding because I'm Canadian. So then I was advised by a few people, like researchers, telling me, find an area in neuroscience that is related to psychedelics and that informs it, get a solid grounding in that, and then move to psychedelics after your PhD. Huh. And so then for my PhD, I did my PhD at McGill University in Montreal, and I did it on the default mode network, which is yeah.
That's what shuts down when you're in a psychedelic trip, right?
Yeah, somewhat. We can get back to that, but cool. But yeah, so it's the default mode network. I'll just like cover it for the listeners. It's this really interesting network because it, on one hand, consists of the regions of our brain that are most expanded in humans relative to other primates. So these are the areas that are selectively more advanced in humans. And we know from all sorts of research, these regions are critical for all the aspects of our thinking and behavior that make us human. Like our ability to remember the past and imagine the future, to think about other people's mental states in a complex way, and to create our own personal narrative of this is who I am, who I'm going to be, and start a sense of self from a kind of like a narrative thinking, language-based perspective. And really just to engage in abstract thinking in general. So I'm like, okay, this network does all the cool things, so I want to study that. And so my PhD was like on, you know, how can we characterize the relationship between the default mode network and different behaviors and different types of thinking? What are the exact regions that compose it? And then also, how is it altered by psychedelics? And I did that with data collected elsewhere.
You sprinkled that in at the end.
Yeah, there's a bit of psychedelics in there.
When you disrupt the default mode network.
Yeah. And so yeah, my PhD consisted of that. Mm-hmm.
Wow, cool. I love that. You also went. Yeah, my dad went to McGill, so when I saw you were going to McGill, I was like, oh wow, that's awesome, man. They're very reputable, long-standing university. Mm-hmm. So what does happen to the default mode network when different psychedelics are at play? And is it different between mushrooms, LSD, ayahuasca? Like, what do we know about that?
Yeah, so there are differences between those three, but there are a lot of similarities, because the main way that all these psychedelic drugs affect the brain is through a particular receptor called the serotonin 2A receptor. So usually serotonin activates this receptor, but psychedelics are able to activate it in actually a unique way that's different than serotonin. Okay. And why and how that is like technical, and we can go into that if we want, but like, let's just leave it at that for now. And the thing with this receptor is that it's most densely located in the default mode network and other areas and the visual area, but like the default mode network is a primary area. And so these different psychedelics all activate this receptor in the default mode network. And what that activation leads to is, we could say two main things. One is it disrupts the usual firing patterns of those neurons. So basically it disrupts activity in the default mode network. Yeah. So it changes the patterns that are occurring. And then the second thing it does is it increases the neuroplasticity of these regions. So it allows these brain cells, neurons, to create new connections. So, you know, it disrupts the activity of these areas and allows them to start connecting in new ways.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is when you disrupt the default mode network, it has a kind of cascading effect throughout the rest of the brain, because the regions in the default mode network are really important for integrating and sharing information across the brain. So in a nutshell, we can say like the processing of the default mode network is disrupted during the experience, and this leads to all sorts of changes and allows us to then change the neurons in the default mode network after, because of the neuroplasticity.
Interesting. It's like, it's almost like a reboot. I mean, a reboot is like everything shuts off and then, it comes back online, and sounds like that's not happening, but there's this like, there's this disruption where like it's like a partial reboot, like certain things kind of get shut down or defragged or fragged.
Yeah.
And then there's this, so you're experiencing the fragmentation or the shutdown, the partial shutdown while you're high, but that afterwards, as things are sort of reassembled and coming back together, there's an opportunity for actual like structural changes to occur and new neurons to link up.
Totally. One good analogy that people use is like ski trails, right? There's like a mountain. If everyone's following the same trails over time, like they're gonna be hard to avoid because there's like a huge indentation, right?
Yeah.
And then you could think of psychedelics as a lot of new snowfall. And now the freedom to explore different trails in your own routes down the mountain are going to be available like they weren't before. And then if you're consistent with those create new groups, right? So that's more or less how people think about how psychedelics affects the brain.
Well, yeah. And when you think about that happening to the part of your brain that is about who you are, who I am, the stories that I build about myself, and the stories that I build about the world, the past, the future. And there was some piece there around like empathy too, where
how you think about others, how you perceive others, and your distinction to others. Yeah.
Like that, having that part of your brain defragged, where it's sort of like jumbled up, and all of these things that perhaps you take for granted. Like we think we know who we are. We think we know who other people are. We think we know our place in the world. We think we know what happened in the past, even though we know that eyewitness testimony is like awful and that people's memories are actually pretty bad. But we think our memory is quite good and that we know what the past was and what we experienced. And even just having our ideas about the future fragmented, that is a powerful experience and an opportunity to see things anew and freshly, And I love how you had your first experience on mushrooms where you realize that we're all just like apes yelling at lights in the sky,
Yeah.
because your identity as a human was coming apart in that moment.
Totally.
Seeing how we're just like animals on a spinning ball, and there's that sort of zoomed out perspective.
Totally. Yeah. And it can be so powerful, right? And this goes hand in hand with what we were saying before about emotional avoidance and defense mechanisms, because what we're talking about are basically like you can call them our egoic structures, right? This is who I am. This is how the world works. And within your stories, which was my story in my early 20s, I'm not an emotional person. I don't get angry. I don't, these things don't matter to me. I don't get sad about things. I'm not weak. Those are all stories, right? Bullshit stories, but things I held on to. And because I held those so strongly, I was disconnected to my body, right? So in psychedelics, when all of a sudden these things are being blown apart and no longer rigid, and then feelings might start flooding you, or memories you had suppressed or forgotten because they didn't fit with your model start coming. And that could be a lot, right? But that's what you can work with in a session if you're ready and if you have the intention to do so, for real transformation and change and reconnection with the body, because those structures are now not as rigid.
Yeah, and all of a sudden you have this experience of feeling and then realizing that you want to feel, like you can really break through that story in that moment. Yeah,
totally.
Wow, yeah. So there's there's a huge opportunity with psychedelics. I think most people are waking up to that, particularly people in our generation are seeing that, because a lot of us have had our own experiences, and we've had good and bad experiences, of course. And I think as you get older and you have more experiences, you realize the importance of setting and sort of setting yourself up to be able to like integrate what's occurring for you, and perhaps dosing properly depending on your setting, etc.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people that I talk to have had at least one experience that was very therapeutic.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those were done with a therapist, but most of them weren't. Most of them were on their own, self-directed, and proper setting, and the opportunity presented itself, and off they went. So
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. There's so much potential here, right? And like, I'm not one of those people who go around saying like, you have to do it with a therapist, never do it yourself. There's more risk involved. And I think if somebody has really severe depression, they probably shouldn't do it by themselves, because they can just go into a negative loop potentially. But really, it's just about being educated and mindful about it, and realizing that things can go really positive, but they can also go really negative if you don't respect the substance and control your context and all of that. So that's why they're so tricky. They're not, you drink alcohol, you know what's going to happen. You take Adderall, you know what's going to happen. You take a psychedelic, any of a variety of things can happen, but you can constrain the set of things by controlling who you're around, your intention, what your mindset is, what your expectations are around it, and all these different contextual factors, as we'd say. So it's a very particular way of approaching it to get the most benefit.
Yeah, I often get people who are afraid to step into this arena because they're not necessarily in a good place in their lives. They're not necessarily feeling ultra positive. They might be dealing with some depression. They might have some life issues that are pretty prevalent in that moment. I work with a lot of guys who are dealing with addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm one of those people who's a little more open-minded to men taking that route and doing a psychedelic journey, if their intentions are in the right place and if they set it up properly. But there's guys who are like just terrified that their own darkness is going to consume them. And so first of all, what do you recommend for people who are thinking that way? And what do you say about this sort of idea of the darkness? Like, is it to be avoided? Is it to be like, what do we do with it?
Yeah, it's a tough one. There's a few things I can say to that. One is, like, interestingly, in the research, they've measured or had large scale surveys of people, asking them about their most challenging psychedelic experiences, right? These are like experiences of fear and anxiety and just like, you think you're going to die, and all the things that can go in the extreme negative direction. And a significant portion of them said that they experienced positive benefits and insights from that process. But when they were able to come to some meaningful resolution of what happened and meaningful understanding for what happened, right? What's important here is the meaning making process around it, and also like feeling like you move through it. So I think the way psychedelic experiences can, leave a lasting negative impact potentially is when you're resisting and holding on and not letting it move through, the emotions of fear, anxiety come up. The most important thing, go into them as far as you can, right? Surrender into them, because the way is in and through. If you resist and push, then it's just going to build in size, and then you're going to be frazzled after the experience. Right. And so, like, in these studies where they're dealing with people who've had depression for 20 years and who've tried 5 different antidepressants, nothing worked, and have all sorts of trauma, all sorts of stuff, they tell them, surrender, trust, go deeper and deeper into the feelings. We're here to support you. Right. And it's all about creating a safe, secure, and trusting therapeutic container for them to be able to surrender. And so I think what's important, for these people with addiction or whatever who are scared of their darkness in these contexts, I think in that case, try to find somebody who can support you throughout the journey, who is there with an empathic presence who's not going to judge them, who they really trust, ideally, potentially with somebody with some kind of professional training, and go in with the intention of, this is going to be hard. I'm going to have to process some deep shit, but I trust that I'm able to surrender and move through it. Mm-hmm. It's fear, resistance, anxiety. It just builds if you go into that place.
Yeah, that is a beautiful insight backed by science, mm-hmm. right? And it makes so much sense. This is a teaching that's brought to every healing modality that is difficult, is that the more you resist this thing, the more you resist what's coming up for you, the more it will hurt you. It's your resistance that hurts you. It's one of the main things that we teach in breathwork, because you get activated and then all kinds of feelings come up in your body. You might get pain in your body. You might get emotions that are coming up that don't feel good. And your resistance to that brings a sort of tightness in your breath, in your pattern. And so it might get tight in your throat. It might get tight in your face. You might like purse your lips a little bit, but then breathing that way causes a chemical shift that then causes more tightness in the body.
Yeah.
So
totally
end up cramped up, like totally cramped up, and they can't move, but they're still sort of doing the breath work. And it's all a manifestation of these subtle control mechanisms that come up. Mm-hmm. And that happens on psychedelic journeys as well. I think we're all afraid at some level that our own darkness is going to consume us, that it's going to like kill us. We're going to die from it, And a lot of us grew up hearing stories about people who killed themselves on a psychedelic journey. This guy jumped out a window, right, shot himself or whatever, jumped in front of a car or whatever it may be, right? And, as you were talking, I was thinking about those situations and thinking, oh, that is profound resistance to what is occurring in the moment. Like if you think you need to kill yourself or you need to jump off a building or whatever it may be, you're trying to escape what's occurring for you in that moment. You've had it. You can't. You've had enough. I can't do it anymore. Mm-hmm. And it's true. That behavior will get you hurt. That kind of avoidance, when things get really intense, will harm you. What won't harm you and what will get you through the other side is the practice of going in and through. Yeah. Whatever it is.
Of being with it.
You're being with it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Your darkest of darkest will not kill you. It will not consume you. You will survive it. It's yours already.
It's all you. Already. It's only you that you're experiencing. It's all you. And it's like, yeah, it's not going to kill you. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That definitely resonates. I've definitely had a handful of experiences where I was quite sure that I was going to die. I've had one on LSD and one on ayahuasca. Definitely a few on ayahuasca. And coming through those experiences and having the right people with me, first of all, in those containers, helped me not do anything too stupid. And debriefing those afterwards, yeah, like I don't feel traumatized by them. I definitely feel shook. Mm-hmm. But I have returned to those places since then. I have returned to that level of just intensity and just feeling like, oh yeah, like this medicine is too strong, get that feeling like, wow, this is too strong. How do I undo this? And then you can't. Oh my God, I'm going to die. Being there and having that sense of like, oh, I've been here before. This is called the full experience. That's what you're getting, bud, and just like reminding yourself, nope, you asked for this and this is your opportunity right now. You're at your edge. You're at your edge. So open your heart and meet your edge.
Rise to the challenge, fight the dragon,
Yeah. Yeah. So the fear, the darkness, it's actually an opportunity. And the one thing that I say to people who are feeling really scared is I recommend they get somebody to be with them who knows what they're doing, who's been through this, you know,
Totally.
who has sat with themselves in these moments, and you know, ideally it's a trained therapist. But my first trip sitter was a guy who I trusted.
Yeah.
Been there. So yeah, nice. So yeah, I'd love to hear also about nervous system work, somatic work. Like I saw that you were working with Scott Lyons in the Embody Lab, and you were on a panel recently, and that's how actually we connected. I was like, "There's Manesh up there with Devin Christie and Dr. Scott, who I did an interview with him this summer in this room."
Nice.
And somatic therapy and somatic work is something that has been really interesting to me over the last few years as I've watched it gain more of a front seat for people, because it actually is so impactful. It's been so impactful for my partner. It's like it's in our home in many different ways, and just this acknowledgement that like your nervous system has its own program that it runs, and it's very almost like a lizard brain, or you know, it's deep in there, you know, and it's hard to get into that via thinking something through or trying to, you know, you can't bypass your nervous system. It's just there. And so, yeah, how do you see somatic work? How do you describe that? And then how does that integrate with psychedelics? Like what's the advantage of doing that work in a psychedelic
Right.
sense?
Totally. I think a lot of it comes down to feeling safe, right? It's like feeling safe in your nervous system, which leads to like you feeling regulated, right? You're not in a hyper vigilant stress response, and then you're not super always just dissociated and just numb, right? It's like finding a right way where your nervous system goes up when it goes up, when it needs to go up, and goes down when it needs to go down. But I think a lot of people have a lot of conditioning from early childhood specifically, or just any traumatic event really, where either their developmental needs weren't met in the right way, like they weren't taught how to self-regulate because they didn't co-regulate with their mom or their primary caregiver, or they lived in a family environment where they had to be on edge as a survival mechanism. And then, you know, now 20 years later, when they're no longer in that environment, their nervous system doesn't know that, right? And so it's like all this programming we have, which can be epigenetically and also just in the structure of our brains over development, which then lead us to respond in ways that are not called for with the reality of the situations we're in, right? And a part of that is an altered relationship to your body. And scientifically, we call that interoception. So interoception can be contrasted with exteroception. So exteroception, like external, extero, right, is our usual senses, like vision, hearing, sense of touch, smell. But then interoception is our experience of our inner feeling states. It's our sense of the internal state of our body. And this includes stuff like feeling hungry, but also tired, or having a stomach ache, or feeling your heart in different ways, and all of these kinds of things. Basically, every feeling somatic state is through what we would call interoceptive processing. And what I talked about in my talk that I did for the Embody Lab was how stuff related to the default mode network and the models we create can actually, through direct brain to body pathways, influence our experience of the body. And how, you know, the belief that we're not safe on some level is a conceptual belief. It's that people can't be trusted. In order to be okay, I need to constantly watch out for signals that something might be wrong. Otherwise, I'm going to get screwed, or something like this, right? And so when you're living with that implicit belief, we interpret people's actions in a very particular way. We respond emotionally in a particular way, leads all sorts of potential dysfunction in our relationships and in our life, and can create anxiety and all these things, right?
Yeah.
But also it will make us downplay or ignore situations and experiences that contradict that. So it's like, oh, that person was just being friendly. That this is just one person who's safe, but everyone else is not safe. That was a unique event. It's not reflective of reality. So like we're dismissive of counter evidence. And so the point I've been making is that psychedelics, through their ability to disrupt our beliefs and models and frameworks can then open us up to see like, oh, maybe, I have been safe in these contexts. Maybe I am worthy of love. Maybe, the world isn't such a bad place. Maybe I have been over responding, and allow this recalibration of the mind body connection to then enable us to feel safer in our body and to have a more regulated nervous system. And so I think our sense of our body and feeling states and stored energy in our body is deeply connected with our brain and our mind and our psychology. For example, through the vagus nerve and through various different pathways that go up and down. And so it's all connected.
I have clients and have had friends who have sat in ceremony with me, and I say that in a way that it sounds like I'm leading the ceremonies. I don't lead ceremonies, but I facilitate and bring people in, and then we sit together. I have lots of friends who are on this path of sort of the somatic, the nervous system healing, et cetera. And I've had people share that afterwards, like that during the ceremony, things got really intense. They felt this sense of, oh, I'm not safe. I'm not okay right now. I can't trust these people. Who are these people anyways? Like maybe this is all a recreation of I'm unsafe again, right? That sense coming up, that nervous system getting activated when there's some fear, there's some uncertainty, there's certainly some darkness, like literally dark room, but also feelings that feel dark, and also whatever wacky spiritual shit that's going on in these ceremonies, which I can just tell you feels very real at the time, whether it is or not. And like, oh my God, I can't trust these people, and here's all this fear coming up, and then realizing in that moment, like, oh yeah, that's my fear. Like I knew this was going to come. Here it is, and then doing a little reality check, like maybe I am safe. Do I actually trust these guys? Like, wait a minute. Yeah, I do trust these guys. Do I trust Ben? Yeah. Oh, do I trust the curandero here? Like, yes. Am I safe in this moment? Wait a minute. I am safe in this moment. And just like having this breakthrough where you can almost talk to yourself from an outside place because you're fragmented. The different parts of you are sort of blown apart.
Right.
And then having this healing moment. And I've had that in ceremony multiple times. And I've had this ability to do my own nervous system healing. Like I had, when you're describing what happens to dysregulate people's nervous systems, like no co-regulation with a parent and a lack of safety in the home. I had both of those. I had both of those, and I love my parents and they're great. But they would agree with me that there was a lack of emotional regulation in our home because none of us knew how to do that at the time. And for me, with my older brother, there was definitely a lack of safety, emotional safety, sometimes physical safety, but definitely emotional safety. And I was always sort of like, at risk. Let's just say that I was always at risk. And so I have a nervous system that is like on edge, ready to fight kind of all the time. And I bring that to my wife. I bring it into my home. And that's what it wants to do. Like it just wants to 0 to 60 and get ramped up. And so I've been doing this work to really try to calm it. And I noticed last year when I was in a ceremony where I brought up some memories of my brother, and I felt myself separate from my nervous system, and I just watched the nervous system get all like when a cat sees a dog or sees a threat, and all of a sudden its hair goes and its tail goes up and it stands up real tall. Like that happened to my nervous system in 2 seconds. But I was able to meet that with my adult self, my open-hearted, like father energy, and breathe through that and like try to calm the nervous system from this like deep level. And I really felt like that one-on-one 101 therapy session, this like therapy session with myself, had a lasting effect on my nervous system, and how, because I still have a relationship with my brother, how
Right.
I feel around him. Because I was noticing that I was like still quite activated whenever I saw him. And that since then that has come down. So just a little
Amazing.
personal story of how I have felt that ability to kind of like do somatic work in a psychedelic scenario. Have you had an experience of that, or that's relatable?
I think for me, a lot of the I guess you could say trauma that I experienced was through bullying. And so it was cases in which I felt helpless and wasn't able to fight back. So it's suppressed anger, basically.
Yeah, right.
Right. And so a lot of my processing, interesting, it hasn't come out in ceremony too much. It was mostly, processing with the therapist I mentioned earlier and beating the shit out of pillows and screaming into pillows and all that. But like in this psychedelic journey, often, especially this used to happen before, I would shake uncontrollably. Like my legs, my hips, I would just like totally be vibrating until it like hurt and I had to make it stop. Because there's just so much, I guess, stored energy or whatever you want to call it from unexpressed emotion. Part of that is anger, but we all know underneath anger is sadness, right? And so it's like a combination of both. And yeah, breathwork and psychedelic journeys, shaking. Breathwork like makes me cry definitely more. As it did when I was working with you that one time. I remember that.
Was the goal, remember?
Yeah. I was like, Ben, I want to cry today, and fucking happened.
Yeah, that's bad.
Yeah.
And of course the work's never done. Like, I really like to make that clear for people that yeah, you're going to work through layers of things, but in my opinion, most of us are carrying the scars of our childhood. No matter how much work we do, there's remnants of it there. A scar is this like healed part, but it looks a little different. It's noticeable, and you can sort of touch it and feel it. And I just also like to dispel the idea that like your work is done someday. It's done the day you die.
Right.
And you just keep working at it. So, yeah, you have to go through the layers, and so this like going to the anger over and over and just purging it is so important. And, of course it'll come up in a psychedelic journey for you if that's what needs to happen. I really felt like in that moment with the work that I was doing with my brother, that it was just like an opportunity that presented itself. Like I've done more than 60 ceremonies. And so it just sort of like was like, okay, here's what's happening today. It's just one of the many things that happened that night. So, yeah. I'm also curious how shadow work fits into this, because, you and I have done work in these sort of shadow work containers where people are expressing parts of themselves that are repressed or unsavory, and sort of stretching themselves. And so I'm curious. And it also, shadow work is a bit of a buzzword too these days. It's like a cool thing that is mysterious. People don't really know what it is, and or they say that they do, or whatever. How do you do shadow work and how does that, like, particularly in the context of psychedelics?
Totally. So I think, one way we could just define shadow work perhaps is like getting in touch with those parts of yourselves that you've rejected and that you think are not socially sanctioned or accepted. Right. And I think psychedelics can be powerful in helping you see blind spots. Because I think before you could admit something to somebody else, you have to admit it to yourself. Right. And we have, you and I, I'm sure we know very well how elaborately we can hide things from ourselves and just be totally blind to them. Right. Even when people are screaming it in our face, like, no, that's impossible. I'm not like that, and that's just like, that's like stage one. Right. And then it's like, And then later is like, oh, coming to see and realize it within yourself. And then having the actual courage and some level lack of shame to be able to express it to somebody else in a safe context, right? And with psychedelics, it can, by virtue of just like opening you up, relaxing your defenses, and putting you on this wide-ranging journey where your mind travels through all sorts of places, you can start to notice things about yourself and your patterns, how you relate to others, how you regard yourself, subtle, relational things that start to open up your awareness. You're like, oh shit, I am a bit of an asshole. Or, oh wait, I am constantly putting myself as superior to other people and creating distance. Definitely a thing that I've been working on and still getting called out on it occasionally by people close to me. And it's like, these are things that are so hard to notice in yourself. For me, it's like men's group was massive in pointing that out. Conscious relationship training, so great, but these are containers created for it, and not everyone has access to that, or like are in groups that are quality where they feel safe, right? But with psychedelics, and in terms of your own internal process, you're like, you could be lying there with eye shades on, exploring all this stuff, and then if you're doing it consciously and intentionally, and journal about it, and you're a reflective person, I think it can help people start to open up to all their things that they're hiding from themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can see how self-centered you are, self-obsessed you are in your mind. There's this ability to kind of zoom out and like watch what your mind does and then go, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I've had multiple experiences where I see where there's like a narrator, like trying to write down and story everything that's happening, including like what I'm having in my trip.
Right.
For telling the story later. And there's also like a AI tool plugged into that's making like an Instagram post or Facebook post about it.
Yeah. All the layers of being Ben. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I'll like totally just notice myself doing that on a trip and be like, what?
Yeah.
What do you fucking stop it?
Totally get it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's this beautiful opportunity when everything's sort of blown apart, to see the different sides of yourself and to really own that and come back with like, how does integration work? Like, is that real? Are psychedelics just a temporary state that, doesn't last, and it's just like you're entering a fictional world and then you come back and you've forgotten everything, because like that is actually what I thought in the beginning. I would have acid trips in my teens and I'd have experiences that felt really real, even, other things, cannabis, etc. But then when it's back to reality, it's like, oh, that was just a hallucination. Like, what tangible things actually come from these things, or is it just all play?
Yeah, I think there's huge potential for lasting change. And this, for reasons that set psychedelics apart from cannabis, for example, or most other drugs. And it's because psychedelics truly like increase neuroplasticity in the brain. They literally cause neurons to sprout new arms, if you will, and connect with other neurons. And literally, it's making them proliferate and grow and, create new connections. But the thing is, the brain is always trying to be efficient and economical. So it's not going to let a whole bunch of extra connections stay if you're not using them, right? And so like the central thing is, when you come out of that experience, to use that neuroplasticity in a conscious, deliberate way and consistent way in order to create new lasting brain connections and circuits. And so part of it is like, if you go into the experience thinking like, oh, I'm just going to have these exalted, crazy states, and then it's just all temporary. I mean, you're kind of creating that for yourself, right? Whereas if your intention is, I'm going to have a profound experience and try to take as much gold as I can and create actionable steps that I'm going to implement in my day, every day, and that I'm going to measure and manage and journal on and get accountability on, et cetera, right? And if you do that, then I really think psychedelics can catalyze lasting change and things that can last a lifetime. And in these studies, like there's people 20 years plus of depression, nothing's worked for them. After 3 sessions and with some follow-up afterwards, like 3 drug sessions, a year later, they're no longer depressed, right? And potentially forever, depending on the nature of their depression. Yeah. And so there's a lot of scientific evidence for like lasting changes in anxiety, depression, substance use, et cetera, 6 months to a year after. But I want to stress that, yeah, again, like having that intention, I'm doing this for lasting change, and putting the effort to follow up on it in a concrete way.
That makes a lot of sense. I've been to a lot of personal growth workshops. I've been a part of a lot of men's groups and these transformational experiences, retreats. And in all of those things, there are people who get a ton out of it because they're very invested in the process. You and I both, have you done Landmark?
No, I haven't. I've obviously heard all about it.
But yeah, you and I both know a ton of people who have done Landmark, for instance. That's one of the better known workshops, for lack of a better term. And we both know people who say that Landmark changed their lives. Mm-hmm. You know, there was a shift that occurred for them in terms of how they understand language, how they understand integrity, how they understand how they show up in the world and their meaning in the world and all of this stuff. Those people were very invested in that process. They jumped in with 2 feet. And there's people that come away from Landmark saying like, that was bullshit, that thing's a cult, and I didn't get anything out of it. And I've been in workshops where I can see that guy is on board for what's happening here, and he's willing to just try this on like he's trying on a new coat, and he's going to do it 100%. He's going to like own that coat for the weekend or for the week or however long the workshop is. And that guy over there wants to show up and just take notes and doesn't want to fully commit to the process.
Totally.
You know, I've seen people get kicked out of workshops because they're not following all of the rules. They think they just only have to follow some of the rules.
Classic.
And they don't get anything out of it, either because they had that mindset all the way through, or because they get booted partway through the process for not participating. And a psychedelic journey is like a very weird workshop that's just happening inside your own mind.
Yeah.
And everything's getting warped and blown apart, and you maybe sometimes don't even know which way is up or down, or who you are, or what the world is. You can go that far out, but then you also come zooming back down slowly and slowly integrate back into the different layers. And it's a different kind of workshop. and it's going to be, there's no standard program for that workshop. It's going to be different every single time and customized to you. But all that to say, if you go into it with this mindset of like, just like, I want to see what happens to me. You know, I want to take this because like, I want to see what happens, or like, I want to have a good time. You might not have a good time. And B, what happens to you isn't going to be of much consequence if that's as far as your intention goes. So that really resonated with me, like what you were sharing about, you know, if you want to get something out of it, if you're showing up with your notes and like your book is open, you're ready to like be fully in, you know, you're studied up, you're signed up, you've airplane moded your phone, and you're like, let's go. It's likely that you're going to have more of a lasting change from that process.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And there's research to back this. Like there's been studies where they put together, like in a study, usually we would like collect all sorts of psychological personality assessments before a journey, and then link that to changes during and after. Right. And one of the main things that was correlated with having more intense effects is a willingness to surrender and let go of their day-to-day concerns. Literally, like statistically, quantitatively, that was significantly correlated with more mystical experiences of oneness and more positive benefits. So it's really all about surrender, trust, letting go of all your shit, and leaning in as far as you can go.
Yeah, like you can kind of see how this, first of all, this desire to think about your outside life and like what's going on and am I still here is a distraction. It keeps you out of the process, but it's also like this sort of soothing mechanism that keeps you part way out, part way in, but it prevents you from getting the true value of like jumping fully into the experience.
Yeah. It's a form of resistance.
It's a form of resistance. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cool. I'd love to know, and like, perhaps this is a great thing to end on, is what are you excited about right now? Maybe something you're researching right now, or something that you think is happening in the field that's exciting for you. Like, what's got you stoked these days? I know there's a lot happening in the world of psychedelics, and you're kind of in the center of it, living in San Francisco there, and working with the boss of all bosses. But what are you stoked on?
Yeah, a few things. I mean, so, usually how psychedelics are talked about in the culture and how we've been framing it is in the context of specifically personal growth, healing, mental health, transformation. But I think there's a whole untapped world of psychedelics for creative problem solving and for things like innovative breakthroughs and this kind of thing. And so I'm really excited about, the prospect of, for example, giving psychedelics to a bunch of top either software engineers or just any kind of engineer or scientists and researchers who are struggling with a problem in their field, or like are trying to bridge different areas, and creating kind of optimized containers for them to take a psychedelic and potentially have a breakthrough. Because there is a lot of, there's reports of people having these massive scientific or engineering breakthroughs under a psychedelic, usually after a long incubation period, right? It's like you read, you learn, you read widely, think about it as much as you can. And then in the experience, it all comes together and you're like, oh shit, here's the whole picture, right? And that ability, which seems to be very real, I've had similar experiences, hasn't been studied in the scientific research so far. And you could just think of all the potential implications for large scale organizations and corporations for innovation within the business, right? And then not only that, and like any kind of organization or context or initiative. And so that's something I'm excited about. And there's a cool organization trying to lead this called the Center for Minds. And they recently reached out to me. Me and Robin are going to collaborate with them. And they're all about funding, bringing together money to fund studies such as that for what they call psychedelic-assisted innovation. And so I'm hoping to get involved in that. And so that's what I'm excited about. It's like, how can we push the needle forward as a civilization and help deal with all the shit that's going on, and use psychedelics to help with this kind of visionary thinking? That I think is super cool.
How can we get our politicians how can we get Camp David to be handing out psychedelics and facilitating sessions for these guys who are at the highest level, right? I think most of us agree that would be a good idea, because there seems to be an inability to get along on a large scale.
But the important thing is they have to want it too, right? Because I think the other side of this is like psychedelics can promote narcissism and they can promote messianic complexes, right? And so it's like you get a whole bunch of high-powered top CEOs in a room, a good portion, a higher proportion than the general public, they're going to be narcissists or like have some kind of personality disorder, right? That's probably the case, because that is what allows people to rise, right? A lot of the time in the way that society's set up. So it's like, there's a lot of intricacies there of proper containers and selecting the right CEOs who we think would be amenable to that and all that. But yeah, it's an interesting problem.
Yeah, that's amazing to think that like a psychedelic could just be rocket fuel for a narcissist. Psychedelic could just be like this extra oomph behind the ego of a narcissist.
I think it can happen for sure. Yeah, it does happen. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think was there not a microdose study with LSD where they gave it to like tech or physics, like scientists, and then found that like a higher proportion of them solved their problems that particular day.
I don't remember seeing that.
Familiar with that?
No, it'd be interesting if that exists. Yeah, I haven't heard about that.
It's very vague in my memory, and I think it wasn't like a macro dose. I think it was a micro. And and there was like sort of a particular dosage there, like maybe 15 micrograms, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Interesting.
They took a group that was a control group, and then they took another group and gave them a few days in this room trying to solve problems and stuff that they've been wrestling with. They actually had them conjure, like, what's something that you've been working on recently that's been hard for you to solve?
Right.
And I'll see if I can find this study. And a certain proportion of both groups solved their problems, but a higher proportion of the group that took the microdose solved their problems. And I think that was like an early thing that got Silicon Valley going with the whole microdosing craze that occurred.
Okay, interesting. There is a 1966 study that's similar along those lines, but I haven't heard of one in the last couple of decades. But yeah, if you're able to dig that up, that'd be super interesting.
Maybe it was the 1966 study, and it was just like dug up and referenced.
Probably by somebody pitching it as if it was new, classic.
Yes. Yeah, but that certainly would be helpful. I mean, we have a lot of complexity in the world right now. There's a lot of big, powerful systems that are starting to merge with each other, and we're now in the AI age, and world politics are more complicated. World economy is more complicated, and there's just a lot happening. And so we need very creative ways of finding our path forward without further taking ourselves down. So
totally,
that's very interesting. Yeah. Well, man, this is a great conversation. I could actually just sit and talk with you about this for a long time. I appreciate the work that you're doing, and that you're trying to advance this field in a good way and take it to the places where it needs to go in this world. And, taking the integrity and, your own sort of walking the walk, your own inner work into this field, and being just a good ambassador for psychedelics. So
yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah. Thank you. And thanks for having me on here. Great to finally do this and chat. And yeah, I agree. We could just go on and on and on, but this has been a great chat. I think a lot for the viewers to digest. So thank you.
How can people follow you? Where are you active these days? I know you've got a YouTube channel, which is quite informative and enjoyable to watch. So maybe share that with people.
For sure. These days, right now, I'm most active on Instagram. So it's the Psychedelic Scientist on Instagram. Also have a personal website that recently went up, which looks pretty nice. I'm happy about. It's maneshgirn.com. And then you got the YouTube. And mainly that for now. I have a lot of offerings and things in store in the near future, and a mailing list and all that. And just trying to provide education at the intersection of neuroscience, psychedelics, and like the cutting edge of mental health, and on the practical side and the theory side. So yeah, follow me on those things and keep up to date for some cool stuff.
Yeah, Psychedelic Scientist on YouTube as well, right? Nice, man. We'll share those links in the show notes for people. And you're at the beginning of a very interesting career, my friend. So it's going to be cool to watch all the stuff that you get into. Of course, would love to check in with you sometime in the future, maybe a few years down the road, and see what's happening then, and what you've discovered then, and what you've gotten into. And let's stay connected. But thanks for taking 60, 70, 80 minutes here with my audience to share about what's happening. And yeah, I think really the theme of this episode was the intersection of inner work with psychedelics. Like, how does that really apply? And I think we touched on some really good points. So thanks, Manesh.
Totally, man. My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Much love.